Io ran in circles around the small courtyard, pushing a plastic bottle with his foot and pretending it was a real football. He laughed so hard he started hiccuping, not noticing how heavy the sky looked or how the air smelled of smoke. Inside the tiny house, his uncle and aunt argued in sharp, angry whispers. Their voices rose and fell like waves during a storm. When Io heard his own name mixed with words like curse and bad luck, he pressed his ear to the door, confused and a little scared. When the door opened, he saw tears on his aunt's cheeks and something dark in his uncle's eyes. They told him to wear his sandals and follow. Io tried to joke that it was too late for a walk, but no one laughed. They walked through quiet, narrow alleys until they reached a loud, busy road filled with honking cars and shouting people. His uncle knelt and grabbed Io's shoulders so tightly it hurt. He whispered that Io was the reason for the strange sickness, the accidents, the trouble at home. He said the elders believed Io was a witch child. The words cut deep. Io shook his head fast, a small awe slipping out as he tried to deny it. His aunt turned away, crying harder. Then they stood up and walked across the road. They didn't look back. At first, Io laughed weakly, thinking they were joking. But when they kept walking into the crowd, his voice cracked. He stood alone in the bright headlights, clutching his shirt, tears sliding down his face as he understood they were not coming back. The days that followed felt long and slow, yet they also mixed together until Io could hardly tell one from the next. He slept under a rusted kiosk on Quito Road, squeezing himself into the small, dry corner where the metal sheet didn't leak. Every night he woke again and again. Sometimes it was rats running close to his feet. Sometimes it was drunk men arguing or throwing bottles. Sometimes it was the cold. He pulled his thin shirt tight around himself and tried to pretend he wasn't shaking. In the morning he walked behind food stalls, hoping someone would give him something. A few kind women gave him bones with tiny bits of meat. They sighed when they looked at him as if they wished they could do more. Others frowned and whispered which child. Some even crossed themselves when he passed, their eyes filled with fear. He tried not to look hurt, but the words stuck to him like dust. The older street boys were even harder to deal with. They joked in a way that wasn't really joking. When it rained too heavily, they pushed him and said he brought the storm. When someone's phone disappeared, they said he took it with his magic. One boy slapped the back of his head just to see him jump. Io gave a small, shaky laugh to show he didn't mind, but inside he felt something crack. He started to wonder if maybe they were right. Bad things had happened around him. His mother's sudden death, the day the roof fell, his uncle's shop catching fire. Maybe it was all connected. Maybe he really was the problem. At night, when the city lights flickered and the smell of frying fish floated in the air, Io curled up with his knees tight against his chest. He hugged his legs and cried into them, wiping his face quickly whenever he heard footsteps. He didn't want the other boys to call him weak. Every tear felt heavy, like it pulled him deeper into the ground. Sometimes he looked up at the sky and whispered to the stars. He talked as if his mother could hear him. He asked her why she left, why everything fell apart, why people were scared of him. He asked if he truly carried a curse. The night never answered. Only dogs barked in the distance and trucks growled down the road. The world moved on around him while he stayed small and unseen. He tried to sleep, but loneliness pressed against him like another body. It sat on his chest, it filled his throat, it made every breath feel too big for his tiny frame. Even when he closed his eyes, he could still hear his uncle's voice calling him misfortune. He replayed the moment they walked away from him on the road, their backs disappearing into the crowd. Sometimes he thought he saw their faces in strangers passing by, but when he blinked, they were gone. Days turned into a quiet fight for survival. Io learned to hide his fear. He learned when to run, when to stay quiet, when to pretend. But every night, when the city settled and he was alone again, the truth returned. He was just a small boy on Quito Road, trying to hold himself together while the world treated him like a shadow that didn't belong to anyone. The sun was burning hot that afternoon, the kind of heat that made Io's skin feel tight and his stomach growled louder than usual. He and the other street boys stood near the tall fence on Manda Hill, staring at the big mango tree inside the compound. The boys joked and dared each other to climb. Io tried to ignore his hunger, but it felt like something was biting him from the inside. When they all pushed him forward and told him to go first, he didn't argue. He placed his bare foot on the rough bark and began to climb. His heart beat fast, but the moment he reached the branches, he felt lighter. The wind touched his face. He could see the rooftops far away. For a few seconds he forgot he lived under a kiosk. He forgot the whispers, the fear, the names people called him. Up there, he felt almost like a real boy again. He reached out, picked a ripe mango, and laughed softly when its sweet smell filled the air. He threw 2 mangoes down to the boys. They clapped and cheered like he was a hero. Then a loud, angry shout cut through the moment. Io startled. His foot slipped. He scraped his arm on the bark and fell hard onto the ground. Pain shot through him. Before he could get up, the other boys ran in every direction, leaving him alone. A tall man with a faded shirt and glasses marched toward him, face tight with anger. He grabbed Io's wrist and pulled him toward the gate. Io burst into tears. Words tumbled out of his mouth. He kept saying he was sorry, that he was stupid, useless, cursed, anything that would make the man stop yelling. Those words made the man stop. He looked closely at Io for the first time. Really looked. His eyes moved from the bleeding scrape on Io's arm to his torn, oversized shirt, then to his face. Io's eyes looked too old for a boy his size. They carried fear, hunger, and something broken. Io tried to explain between sobs. He said he was hungry. He said he slept under metal sheets on Keto Road. He said his family didn't want him anymore. When he tried to laugh it off, the sound came out weak and sad, like he was trying to make a joke so the man wouldn't think he was worth pitying. The man's anger faded, first into surprise, then into sadness, and finally into a gentle kind of worry. He let go of Io's wrist and sighed. He told him his name was Baba Kofi. He said he worked as a mechanic and lived alone with an old dog and a stack of books that always fell over. He shook his head at the mangoes scattered on the ground and told Io to come inside so they could clean his wound. Io froze. His mind repeated the word he feared most. Which? What if this was another trap? What if the man changed his mind and threw him out too? He looked at the open gate and at the man waiting inside. Very slowly, with his heart pounding so hard he felt it in his throat, Io stepped forward. 1 foot past the gate, then another. He had no idea that this small step would change everything, that he would never sleep under a kiosk again. Baba Kofi's house in Nkwazi West was old and simple, with cracked walls and doors that made tiny squeaks every time someone touched them. The air smelled of engine oil and fried onions, and the curtains looked like they had survived many years. But to Io, it felt like the safest place he had ever stepped into. He sat at the small kitchen table, hands resting stiffly on his knees, unsure if he was even allowed to move. Baba Kofi washed his scraped arm gently, humming a tune that didn't follow any rhythm. When he placed a warm plate of rice and stew in front of Io, the boy blinked in surprise. Io laughed from shock and hunger, took a quick bite, then ate too fast and started choking. Water spilled when Kofi tried to help, and both of them ended up laughing like 2 people who had forgotten how to laugh. In the days that followed, the old man let him sleep on a mat in the front room. He didn't ask many questions. He didn't talk about curses or blame. Instead, he showed Io small things, like how to sweep the yard so the dust didn't fly everywhere, how to feed their quiet old dog Jambo, and how to warm food without letting the pot burn. Their talks were short and a little awkward, but there was comfort in the silence between their words. Sometimes Io cracked a tiny joke, and Kofi would chuckle in that soft, tired way of his. One night, heavy rain crashed on the metal roof, loud enough to shake the windows. Io jolted awake from a nightmare. In the dream, his uncle's voice shouted "Which child?" again and again while flames chased him. He sat up crying, breathing fast, his small body shaking. A moment later, Baba Kofi stood at the doorway wearing an old robe. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just walked over and sat beside him. His hand rested gently on Io's back while he whispered that bad dreams weren't predictions. They were only old memories playing too loudly in the dark. Io let out a small, weak laugh, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. He whispered that everyone in his old home thought he was cursed. He said it quietly, as if afraid the word itself might fill the room. Kofi listened and shook his head. He told Io a story about how people fear things they don't understand, especially when the fear is easier than facing the truth. His voice cracked once, like he had known his own share of pain, but he quickly covered it with another soft laugh. Io didn't ask questions. He just leaned slightly toward the old man, feeling warmth instead of fear. When he lay back down and closed his eyes, the house felt peaceful around him. For the first time in a long time, he let himself breathe slowly. And as sleep returned, he felt a small spark inside him whisper that maybe he wasn't what people had called him. Maybe their words were not the final story of his life. The months moved slowly but gently, like the world was giving Io a second chance. With help from a local charity that heard about his life on Keto Road, he was able to start school again. Baba Kofi paid the rest of the fees without a single complaint. On his first morning at Emrimbe Primary, Io felt his stomach twist. As he walked into class, he felt every eye turn toward him. He braced himself, ready for the whispers, ready for the cruel name he had heard too many times. But instead, a girl with bright eyes named Zola slid half her biscuit onto his desk and smiled. Later she saw him sketching a car in the corner of his notebook and said she liked it. Her voice was simple and honest, and it made Io let out a small, real laugh. His shoulders relaxed for the first time that day. At home, Io discovered something new about himself. He wasn't just a boy people blamed for strange things. His hands could create, fix, and understand. In the mechanic yard behind the house, he watched Kofi work with quiet focus. The old man showed him how engines breathed, how wires carried life, how machines spoke if you listened well. One afternoon, when Kofi stepped aside, Io tried fixing a generator that kept dying. He tightened a bolt, adjusted a wire, and suddenly the generator coughed and came roaring back. Io jumped away, shocked, then burst into laughter. Jambo barked excitedly, running in circles. Kofi clapped like a proud parent, his eyes shining. But even good days couldn't erase everything. Some children at school still whispered the old rumors they heard at home. One boy leaned close to Io during break and said maybe he was good at repairing broken things because he was broken himself. The sentence felt like a stone thrown at his chest. That night Io cried in the bathroom, hugging himself tightly so no one would hear. When he finally stepped out with swollen eyes, Kofi didn't ask what was wrong. He only handed him a wrench and said he needed help tuning an engine. It was his quiet way of reminding Io that he was more than someone else's cruel words. Slowly, through many small moments, Io began to rebuild himself. There were nights he stayed up finishing a school book because he wanted to prove he could. There were weekends when he worked beside Kofi for hours, laughing at silly jokes until they both had tears in their eyes. Each time he fixed a bike, or solved a math problem or made Zola giggle with his jokes, something strong grew inside him. He started to see himself differently, not as a curse, not as a burden, but as someone helpful, someone patient, someone who could make others smile. He began to believe he had a place in the world, not just on the edge of it. Bit by bit, Io learned what it meant to belong. Io grew into a strong young man without even noticing it happen. His shoulders widened from years of lifting engines, and his hands moved with confidence around tools that once scared him. People in Nkwazi now brought their noisy cars and tired generators straight to him. They called him the clever one at Kofi's and trusted his work. He joked with customers and they joked back. No one crossed the street to avoid him anymore. When he looked at the faint scars on his arm, he no longer thought of fear. He thought of that mango tree, the day everything changed. One warm afternoon, as dust floated lazily in the air, Io wiped his hands on a cloth and stepped toward the gate to check on a customer. But he froze. Standing there were two familiar shapes. A man and a woman, clothes worn thin, faces older than he remembered. His aunt and uncle. The world seemed to stop. For a moment he felt 10 years old again, small and trembling. He waited for the old words to hit him, the ones that once carved holes in his heart. But instead, his aunt's eyes filled with tears. Her voice cracked as she called his name, an awe so full of pain it made his chest tighten. She reached toward him like a mother reaching for a child she feared she had lost forever. Slowly, with shaking voices, they began to speak. They told him about the sickness that swept through their home, the debts that swallowed everything, the fire that destroyed what was left. They admitted that the pastor and neighbors told them he was the cause, that pushing him out would save them. They believed it. They acted out of fear, and still everything collapsed. His uncle bowed his head so low it almost touched his knees, saying guilt had followed him every day since. Io listened in silence. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Anger flashed inside him, sharp and hot. But there was sadness too, and something that felt dangerously close to mercy. He let out a small, bitter laugh, because it felt unreal that the same people who abandoned him were now standing at his gate with tears running down their faces. He wanted to yell, to ask why he wasn't worth fighting for. At the same time, he remembered the Sundays when his aunt combed his hair gently, humming as she worked. He didn't hug them. He didn't shout either. He simply told them that he had a home now. That someone who owed him nothing chose him and gave him a life worth living. Baba Kofi walked out then, leaning on his stick. His eyes held caution but also understanding. Without saying much, he gestured for them to sit under the mango tree he and Io planted the year before. They all sat on wobbly plastic chairs, the air quiet and heavy. No one knew what to say next. But for the first time, they were facing the hurt instead of running from it. And in that silence, something small and fragile began to heal. The visits didn't become normal all at once. Some months passed without a single knock at the gate, and Io felt a mix of relief and worry in those quiet stretches. But slowly, his aunt and uncle came back again, no longer hiding behind excuses or pride. Each time they arrived, they carried small gifts in their hands. Sometimes it was dried fish wrapped in old newspaper. Sometimes a simple hand-woven mat. Once his aunt brought a faded photograph of Io as a toddler sitting on her lap. She held it to her chest and cried the moment she saw him, whispering apologies even when the words tangled in her throat. Io didn't forgive easily. Some days he welcomed them with a smile and even joked about old memories. Other days he stayed quiet, answering with short nods while a heavy feeling sat behind his ribs. He often stayed up late talking with Kofi, his voice shaking as he tried to understand his own heart. He asked if forgiveness meant pretending the past never happened. He worried that accepting them again might erase the pain of the boy who once slept in the cold, alone, under metal sheets on Keto Road. Kofi sat beside him, eyes shining with age and emotion, and said forgiveness was not forgetting. It was choosing what to build from what remained. One sunny Sunday, Io decided to take a small step. He invited his aunt and uncle to the yard behind the house, where he taught a group of street boys how to fix bicycles. The boys crowded around him, their hands messy with grease as they passed tools and copied his movements. He showed them how to hold a spanner the right way and corrected them gently when they rushed. They laughed loudly when one of them got grease on his nose, and Io laughed with them, warm and full. His aunt and uncle watched from a distance, tears running freely. They saw the boy they abandoned now teaching other children not to fall through the cracks the way he once did. A few weeks later, a photographer from a local charity visited. She asked if she could take a picture of the people who shaped Io's journey. They gathered under the mango tree he had planted with Kofi, the branches spreading wide above them. Kofi sat in the middle with his usual calm smile. Io stood on one side, tall and steady. His aunt and uncle stood on the other, their heads slightly bowed but their faces soft with hope. The sun was bright, making all of them squint and laugh. When Io looked at the photo later, he felt something unexpected. It wasn't a perfect picture. Their clothes didn't match. The chairs were uneven. His aunt's eyes were still red from crying. But for the first time in his life, a family picture felt real. Not forced, not painful, just human. It didn't erase the past, but it showed something new growing in its place. Years later, Io stood proudly in front of a small training center at the edge of Lusango. The building wasn't fancy, but the bright hand-painted sign reading Jambo Skills House made it feel alive. Young people moved in and out, some wearing overalls stained with grease, others still in their school uniforms. The place buzzed with noise. Tools clanged, someone shouted haha at a silly joke, and every few minutes someone let out an excited awe after loosening a stubborn bolt. It was loud, warm, and full of life. Inside, posters of engines covered the walls. In one corner hung a framed picture of Baba Kofi holding baby Jambo the dog and smiling like he had just won the lottery. Kofi was gone now, but Io felt him everywhere, in the wooden shelves they built together, and in the quiet lessons he left behind. On late evenings, when everyone else had gone home, Io sometimes talked to that picture. He shared his worries, his victories, and sometimes even cried when a certain old song came on the radio. One afternoon, the charity that helped him return to school arrived with cameras to record his story. They sat with him under the mango tree, the one he had planted from the seeds Kofi gave him. Io told them about the night he was left on Keto Road, the fear that swallowed him, and the stranger who welcomed him instead of pushing him away. His voice shook at moments, but he kept speaking. He laughed at memories that once hurt and wiped away a tear when the past felt too close. When asked about family, he smiled softly. He spoke about Kofi, the man who became his father in every way that mattered. He mentioned his aunt and uncle, now older and gentler, who visited whenever they could. He talked about the boys and girls who came to the workshop looking for guidance and ended up calling him Big Brother. As the sun dipped lower, a small boy tugged Io's sleeve, asking for help with a screw that refused to move. Io laughed, stood up, and ruffled his hair. He told the camera crew they could continue filming later. Someone needed him. The last image was Io walking back into the workshop, steady and kind, surrounded by people he trusted and people who trusted him. The boy who was once abandoned had grown into the person who now gave others the home he never had.